Okay, again, we're talking about end times tonight. This is part 3. We're talking about the Great Tribulation tonight. As I was going over the slides in review, I realized that talking about the tribulation doesn't give us a whole lot of hope. So I'm starting, true. So I'm starting off with, there is hope. There is a time coming, this is a great tribulation, and it is really a bad time. We're going to see that tonight. It's worse than anyone can really imagine. In some parts of the Bible, it's called the seventh kingdom, or the seventh head. Sometimes it's called the fourth beast of Daniel. But what I want to tell you tonight, just to start off with, before I get started, we win. That's the truth of it. It says, I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them. This is in Daniel 7. Until the Ancient of Days came. That's Jesus. Until Jesus comes. Then judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. We will possess the kingdom. No matter how bad things get, we will possess the kingdom. Okay. Recap of the timeline. The last couple weeks we've talked about, we put together the timeline. There is a 7-year period that Daniel talks about. Jesus references it. And the 7 years starts with the strengthening or the confirming of a covenant. The first 3.5 years we know are birth pains or the opening of the first 4 seals. We didn't see a time constraint on that, so they could actually start, and I believe they do, before the 7-year period starts. The Great Tribulation starts with the abomination of desolation. And then the Great Tribulation is followed by the darkening of the sun, moon, and stars. That's the opening of the 6th seal. And that starts the day of the Lord. We're going to talk about the day of the Lord next week. And God's wrath, which we'll also talk about next week. So as I was looking at this, I was seeing that there's like a convergence. And so this is new. There's a convergence. We've talked about the timeline, but in the timeline we're talking about the strengthening of a covenant, and that includes the building of the temple and the starting up of the sacrificial system. We've also talked about the opening of the first 4 seals and birth pains that Jesus talked about. And we've talked about the emergence of the first beast. And the emergence of the first beast includes the entire world worshiping the beast, except for those written in the Lamb's Book of Life, and the first beast making war on the saints. Of course, that indicates that we're still here during the first half of that period. We're going to see we're also there during the Great Tribulation. So the events of the first 3.5 years, if we're talking about it from a Jewish point of view, or the covenant, because a covenant makes sense to the Jewish people, it's the reinstatement of the sacrificial system, and they believe that the Messiah is coming back, but that the Messiah can't come back until the temple is rebuilt and the sacrificial system is reinstated. So it includes the rebuilding of the temple. We see that especially in 2 Thessalonians, where the man of lawlessness sees himself in the temple, so it has to be there. And I made note that this is probably the covenant of death that Isaiah talks about. So then from the first four seals point of view, what we have is again, probably starting prior to the 7-year period, we have the white horse conquering, and this is subtle conquering, kind of like what we would think in today's world is a political conquering. There's no guns, no anything like that. Then we have the red horse, which is death, the black horse, which is economic crisis, and the pale horse, which is death to a quarter of the world. Jesus talks about the birth pains, and he says that you have the seduction by false prophets, which would kind of go along with a non-warlike conquering. And then we have wars and rumors of wars. We have economic crisis. We have death. And I pointed out that those two are kind of similar. I don't know if they're the same thing or not, but they're kind of similar. And at the beginning of the 7-year period, we have the first beast being empowered. And I'm sorry, one of the things I didn't talk about was back in when I was talking about the Jewish thing, is that it's at the beginning of the 3.5-year period that he confirms that covenant. So I talked about the covenant, but it's at the beginning of the 3.5-year period that happens. Okay, so back to the first beast. The first beast is in place, but it gets its power from the dragon, that's Satan, at the beginning of the 7-year period. The beast, as we saw, is actually 10 kings, and the beast is allowed to make war on God's elect and conquer them, and we are God's elect, and the whole world follows and worships the beast, except those in the book of life. So what I saw was that everything is escalating towards a point in time, and it's converging. So like the strengthening of the covenant, the same he that confirms the covenant is also the he that we're going to see that puts an end to the sacrifice and offering. The opening of the first 4 seals culminates in the opening of the 5th seal. We're going to talk about this tonight. This is just like an overview. The birth pains culminate in the time of Great Tribulation. That's Jesus saying that. The first beast culminates in the presence of the second beast. We're going to see that tonight. And all of this happens in the first 3.5 years, but culminates right at the 3.5-year point of the 7-year period. So I started thinking about what Jesus said. He said there's never been a time like this since the beginning of the world. I said, what could be so bad? So I started thinking, what's happening in the heavenlies at this time? And Revelation 12 actually tells us, I need my glasses. It says, now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, that's Satan. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. Verse 9, and the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Later on in verse 12, talking about the same thing, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. They rejoice. Why? Because Satan's no longer with them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. So it's kind of difficult when you read that passage to place an actual time frame on that happening. Is it like before now? The one that makes the most sense to me is right at the beginning of the Great Tribulation. Is it at the day of the Lord? It may not be chronologic. I ask myself, is the spiritual realm actually bound by time? But what we do see, whether it's timely or not, what we do see in this period is war does break out in heaven. And we'll see a little bit about that next week. Satan does lose the war. Satan is thrown down to the earth, and Satan exhibits great wrath, for he knows his time is short.
I think it's in Genesis that you have the same thing happening, where Satan was basically set to rule the earth.
Yeah.
Before all act broke loose, and a third of the angels fell. This almost sounds like it's part of that.
So as I was looking at it, I'm looking at like Job. Job says Satan is in heaven with the sons of God, and he gets permission to come down to earth. So he's not, if I'm reading Job correctly, that he isn't inhabiting the earth, but he has some control on the earth. We're going to see tonight that that he has restraints on him that are taken away during this time period. So anyways, what I found interesting about this is that this is a time when Satan is actually thrown down to the earth and he takes power. He is unrestrained evil during this time. So keep that in mind as we go through the Great Tribulation, that this isn't just something happening on the earth, but it's a war that's taken place even in the heavenlies. So it adds a little bit of sense to what I'm teaching tonight. Okay, talking about the Great Tribulation. We're not doing table talk, but we're doing open discussion. So describe to me the Great Tribulation period. How long is it? Anyone?
7 years.
Okay, I've heard people say 7 years. What did you say? Probably not 1,000.
7, but now it's kind of like you're saying it's the last 3.5 years.
Yes, yeah, it starts at the middle point. So a lot of people do say that the Great Tribulation is 7 years long. And when we start studying the end times, all of a sudden the Great Tribulation and the end times makes no sense. And people are always trying to mix and match things, and it never makes sense. But when you put the Great Tribulation where Jesus says it is, in the middle, then everything starts to fall into place. When does it start? Well, we just said that. It starts with at the abomination of desolation, which is the 3.5-year point. So what? Go ahead.
Well, how long is it? It was supposed to be 3.5 years, but the days are cut short, right? Because if they weren't, even the elect would be destroyed.
Yeah, and it says that no human would survive if it wasn't cut short, but for the sake of the elect, it's cut short.
Yeah. Now the 70th week of Daniel is still 7 years.
It's still 7 years.
The Great Tribulation time frame
Starts halfway through that.
and it doesn't extend all the way to the end of the 70th week of Daniel. It's cut short by it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. So let's talk about, first of all, we're talking about what is the tribulation period, but let's see what it's not. The 7-year period that's spoken of by Daniel is not the Great Tribulation period. The Great Tribulation period occupies a part of that 7-year period, but the whole 7-year period is not the Great Tribulation. the Great Tribulation period is not a time of God's wrath. A lot of people say, well, the rapture is going to take place at the beginning because we don't experience God's wrath because we're Christians. Well, the whole period is not a time of God's wrath. In fact, it's more accurate to say it's a time of Satan's wrath upon Christians, a time of vengeance. God's wrath starts after the Great Tribulation period, and we're going to see this. God's wrath starts after the celestial darkening, which is the opening of the sixth seal, and it starts at the opening of the seventh seal. So the Great Tribulation, I believe, is the fifth seal, because that's the only one that makes sense. So calling the 7-year period the time of God's wrath is just not biblical. And it's a source of confusion when we say it is. So here's our timeline again. The Great Tribulation is a period of unprecedented tribulation. And Jesus tells us, when you see the abomination of desolation, and we'll talk about a little bit more about that in a little bit, and the abomination of desolation is at the 3.5-year point of that 7-year period. The abomination of desolation, is a sign of the beginning of the Great Tribulation, not the confirming of the covenant, not the Antichrist coming, not a lot of things that the movies say. It is the abomination of desolation, which starts the Great Tribulation. So what somebody asked the other day, or a couple weeks ago, what is the abomination of desolation? Matthew 24:15 says, so when you see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, he says that's when this thing starts. But what is it? Well, 2 Thessalonians gives us a good showing of what it is. We're going to see more throughout the night. It says, the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. So the abomination of desolation is a man who takes his seat in the temple of God and proclaims he is God. A lot more to it than that, we'll see. Questions?
He's not the false prophet, and he's not the Antichrist.
Antichrist is a spirit of unbelief. The false prophet comes into play during the first 3.5 years. So this is someone else.
And it's not the beast, first beast?
It's not the first beast. I think it is the second beast.
Okay.
And you'll see that in a little bit. So there are boundaries to the Great Tribulation period. It starts with the abomination of desolation. And then it says in verse 21 of Matthew 24, and then there will be great tribulation. So the then points back to when you see the abomination of desolation. This isn't trying to decipher Revelation. This is clearly spoke by Jesus himself. So this is Matthew 24. Jesus is speaking. Then you will see great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now, nor never will be. Then is when you see abomination and desolation. As Dave pointed out a little bit ago, it also doesn't go to the end of the 7-year period. It says, and if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. No one would survive. It's that bad. But the verse 29, also of Matthew 24, it says, immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the heaven, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. So what we see is in the red up there, It's the Great Tribulation is bounded by I call it the celestial darkening. It's easier to say than the sun fails to get off its light, the moon turns to blood, the stars fall from the sky, all that stuff. So I just call that whole thing the celestial darkening. It's my words. Okay. So it's a mistake to call the entire 7-year period the Great Tribulation. It starts with the abomination of desolation and it ends with the celestial darkening. We're going to see next week the celestial darkening actually occurs at the opening of the 6th seal. Again, it's a source of much confusion if we try to place the Great Tribulation into the whole entire 7-year period. The Great Tribulation, this is very important. The Great Tribulation is man against man under the influence of Satan. It's Satan taking vengeance through man. God's wrath, which you see in the green, God's wrath is the pouring out of his wrath on an unregenerate man. They're two different things, both within the 7-year period, but two different things. It was asked to me a few months ago, well then what's the purpose of the Great Tribulation? Well, we don't know why God has put that, said that that's going to be. But it is a day of vengeance to fulfill all that's written. So God has decreed that the time of the Gentiles will happen and it will culminate in this Great Tribulation period. It is a time of vengeance against God's people, and the purpose is just to fulfill the time of the Gentiles and fulfill what's written. Sometimes it just is. So we don't know why God has decreed that, but that's what's happened. Questions? So let's talk about the Great Tribulation from the perspective of Daniel. So back in Daniel 9:27, it says, and for half the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Okay, so what this says is that at this halfway through the 7-year period, the same he that we talked about last week that started up the sacrificial system, he's probably involved in the building of the temple. That same he puts an end to the sacrifices. So the very thing that the Jewish people put their hope and faith in is now gone. Not only that, but on the wing of abominations, and setting somebody up on the temple is an abomination. That this guy makes everything desolate. It's just destroys everything until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. Daniel 12, interestingly enough, Daniel 12 talks about this 3.5-year period. It'll be a time of trouble such as never has been since there was a nation till that time. Jesus is not the only one that says that. Daniel's saying this. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. So Daniel says that anyone found written in the book of life will be delivered. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life. We'll talk about the rapture next week, but Daniel's pointing to it, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. So for the second half of the 7-year period, he puts an end to the sacrifice, and again, that's the same he that strengthened the covenant, and he's the one that comes and makes desolate. Making desolate is a state of complete emptiness or destruction. I got that out of the dictionary, not out of the Bible. I had to look that one up. It occurs until the decreed end is poured out in the desolation, and it shall be a time of trouble, unlike anything that's ever been. It culminates in the resurrection, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. So we see that as being the judgment. Daniel 7 also shows another perspective. It says, as for the 10 horns. Now last week we talked about the 10 horns as being 10 nations. It says, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. So you have the 10 kings, and then after the 10 kings, you have another one arising, whom we're going to talk a lot about tonight. He shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down the 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. So he's going to give us, the saints of the Most High, a really hard time. And shall try to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, time and half time. So that's 3.5 years. Questions? Okay, so the earlier vision of Daniel in verse 21, which just precedes that just by a little bit. As I looked, the horn made war with the saints. So Daniel is saying this thing, whoever he is going to make war with the saints and will prevail over them. This guy will prevail over the saints until the Ancient of Days come, and judgment is given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Daniel had a vision of 10 horns, just like it says in Revelation. So they're agreeing with each other is what I'm showing here. And there is another horn that comes up and prevails over the 10, making war against the saints, and judgment is given to the saints, though, and the saints will possess the kingdom in the end.
Are we really throwing in the Gentiles, or are we really still talking about the Jews? The reason I ask that is the way the kingdoms are set up nowadays, and assuming that they'll be similar to that at the end times.
Okay.
I see a lot of this happening to the Jews, the way it's described, more so than any saints in other nations or whatever.
Okay, this is directed, this is spoken of by Daniel. It is directed specifically at the Jews, but it's directed at the saints of God. And we can't forget that we are grafted into the Jews. So even as a grafted in Jew, it applies to us.
When you try to take all the graft-in Christians around the world into this, because it seems more isolated and toward the Jews.
This is directed towards the area around the temple.
Okay.
It is. Okay, there's no doubt about that. When we start talking a little bit about the second beast, we're going to see that this is worldwide. Okay, but yes, this is spoken of by Daniel to the Jews, about the Jews. And yes, it has a great deal to do with the Jews. It has a great deal to do with the sacrificial system of the Jews and the temple of the Jews. So, yeah, very much so. So it says another arises in the place of the 10 kings. So Daniel saw in two different visions, he saw the 10 kings. And we see the 10 kings, last week we talked about the 10 kings as being the first beast. So even Revelation is still talking about the 10 nations or 10 kings. The one that will rise, he's different from the rest. He'll put down 3 of those 10 kings. He speaks against the Most High. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and that's probably an understatement. He shall make war against the saints of the Most High and prevail over them. He changes times in the law, and he reigns for 3.5 years. So questions about that? Anyone else?
Explain the second from the bottom.
He changes the times in the law. I believe that that means that he's going to, things that today are illegal to do, that he's going to say, no, you can kill the Christians. You can, yeah, he's going to change the laws. I don't know what it means by change the times. It just says that in Daniel. I have no idea what that means. So, yes, Dave.
So is this guy the abomination of desolation?
I believe so. He is at least the man of lawlessness. It's questionable whether the abomination of desolation is actually this guy or the statue that he sets up. So, but they both worked. They're both one kind of.
Yeah, there's a prefiguring of that in Jewish history with the Maccabees, where Antiochus Epiphanes comes in, he beats up the Jews, takes over Jerusalem, calls himself God.
Yeah.
Antiochus Epiphanes means God, and then he sets up a big statue of himself, and requires that they worship him, and then they would sacrifice a pig.
Yes.
That's what the whole Maccabean war was about, and the holiday Hanukkah is about that. It sort of prefigures that. It's not.
Yeah, I've never actually read Maccabees, and I understand that it's in there, that this whole history is in the Maccabees. And the only reason why you can't point back to it, and I know you're saying it's not, is because Jesus says it's going to happen later, and that was actually before Jesus' time. So, from the perspective of Jesus, first of all, Jesus shows urgency. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, he says, let those who are in Judah flee. He says, just go. Just, pedal to the metal. Flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not even go in to take what's in his house. Leave it behind. Just get out of here. Let the one that's in the field, don't even go back to get your coat. Go. So there's urgency here. And he says, I'm going to rephrase, too bad for the women that are pregnant. And because he's just saying, alas, like I don't know what to say, who are pregnant, those that are nursing infants in those days. He says, wow, you're going to have it rough. Pray that your flight is not in the winter or on the Sabbath. They can't flee on the Sabbath. They have to go now. Because then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now. No, and never will be. And then in Luke, it says, these are days of vengeance. As we saw earlier, is vengeance of Satan, because Satan knows his time is short, and he is taking vengeance on God's people. We're going to see unrestrained vengeance. Yeah.
I always interpreted a lot of this as being nuclear wars going on, and just mass killings across the whole world. And now, just recently, within the last couple of weeks, the United States Congress has already approved militarizing space, which was never really spoken of.
I'm not going to say in what form, because that would be speculating. I'm not going to say what form these wars take place. There could be a nuclear war. There could be, anything can happen. But for me to sit here and say, yeah, it's going to be a nuclear war would be total speculation. I'm trying to stay away from that. Okay? But yeah, it could be. There's a lot of could-bes.
And you have a lot of, not tornadoes, volcanoes going off.
Volcanoes, earthquakes.
That usually darkens the sky so you can't see it.
Yeah.
It's black.
I mean, people say that Yellowstone's going to blow up. That would blacken a lot of the earth.
Right, well,
So,
the U.S. will be.
yeah, so, but again, that would be speculation. So, Jesus offers this warning to the elect that there will be great tribulation. If those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. And later on, that there will be false Christs and false prophets arising and performing great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. I'm trying to drive home the point here that the elect, that's the Christians, that's God's people, even the Jewish people that are called by him, are still here. So there's a perspective from Jesus that there will be a great tribulation, such as never been from the beginning of the world until now. Somebody mentioned last week that we look at the flood and say that was a pretty rough tribulation. He's saying there hasn't been any tribulation like this since the beginning of the world. So this is even worse than the flood. This is worse than anything we can imagine. If those days had not been cut short, no human being could be saved. A time so terrible, it's worse than any other time since the beginning. It's cut short for the sake of his elect, forgetting not that these are days of vengeance to fill all that is written. This is what I talked about a little bit ago. It's a warning from Jesus to his elect. His elect are still here. I'm not going to repeat what I just said. In 2 Thessalonians, we're talking about the man of lawlessness. So, verse 3, I'm not doing very good on time. Okay, verse 3 and 4, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God and object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. Okay, so what we see there is we see the son of destruction, the man of lawlessness. Verses 9 and 12, the coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan, with all power and false signs and wonders, with all wicked deception for those who are perishing, because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. The thing I want to point out here is this man does oppose himself and exalt himself against God and every other kind of object of worship. He takes his seat in the temple of God. There has to be a temple of God to do that. He proclaims himself to be God. The coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan. He comes with power and false signs and wonders, and comes with all wicked deception for those who are perishing. He is being restrained right now, but there is a time for him to be revealed. So if we look in verses 6 and 7 of that passage, it says, and you know what is restraining him now, so that he may be revealed in his time. Just like Jesus had, he said, it's not my time yet until it was his time. Satan has a time to be revealed. The lawless one is restrained until his time has come, and he is revealed in his time, and that time is the Great Tribulation period. In addition, there's two things happening here. Okay, so the coming of the lawless one is by the activity of Satan, with all power and false signs and wonders, and with all wicked deception. So we see Satan, or the second beast actually, he's empowered by Satan. So we see that he's deceiving those that are perishing because they refuse to love the truth and be saved. But there's something else that's happening here that people don't want to acknowledge. It says, therefore God sends them a strong delusion, so that they may believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth and had pleasure in unrighteousness. So while the man of lawlessness is deceiving people with power and false signs and wonders and deception, God is sending a spirit of deception. God is sending a strong delusion, I'll use the words that the Bible uses, so that they will believe what is false. So on one hand you have Satan trying to deceive people, and God is saying, I'm sending a spirit of deception, of delusion, I keep saying deception, a spirit of delusion, so that the people will believe, so that they will believe what is false, and they will be properly condemned for it. That's a hard thing to...
How does this fit into the end times where it talks about Russia, China, and I don't know if it was Europe, going to go in to attack Israel? Where does that come in this whole thing?
Well,
Is it about the same stories or just...
yeah, I look at the Russia and the wars, and, Luke says that there's going to be armies surrounding Jerusalem, and maybe that's where, and in Luke 21 it says when you see these armies surrounding Israel, or Jerusalem specifically, then flee.
Right.
Well, he uses the same words as Matthew uses with the Great Tribulation. So these armies coming against Jerusalem appears to be the same thing going on. Simultaneously, yeah. So how that's actually going to play out, it'll be interesting to see.
It talks about the bear from Russia and something from China.
Of course.
And then they're talking about eagles for the second eagle, where somebody said it could be England and United States.
Unfortunately, if you look on the internet, you'll see, if you look at 5 different websites, you'll get 5 different answers for that. So I try to stay away from that as much as I can. The 5th seal.
Okay, now all this stuff is happening before God's wrath is even poured out.
Yes, all of this is happening before God's wrath.
Yeah.
So
This is a lot of bad stuff.
this is a lot of bad.
God's wrath.
It's not God's wrath. It's Satan's wrath. It's Satan. It's Satan empowering people to go against God's people, is what it is. Revelation 6:9. He opened the 5th seal. I saw on the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the witness that they had borne. 2 things. People are dying for the witness, for the word of God, and for the witness. They have the witness of their testimony. 6:11 says, then they were each given white robe and told to rest a little longer. It says, until the number of their fellow servants and their brothers should be complete, who were killed as they themselves had been. So not only have these people been killed, but they're given white robes. And they're standing around the throne of God, so it's a good thing. But more death is to come. So people are slain for the word of God and told to rest a little longer until more people die, but they are under the altar of God. Question? No, okay. How do we conquer all of this? I've just said that. They have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they love not their lives even unto death. Bring it on, Satan. God's got my back. Even if you kill me, I'm still going to be with God. And you have to have that faith and that trust in Jesus that he is going to bring you to heaven with him. You just have to. Okay, the second beast. This is the one that this now goes worldwide. Okay? What is the second beast, and why, and what is the mark of the beast? Why take it or not take it? Any comments?
This whole 666 on the forehead thing.
That it is, yeah. The mark of the beast is taken, the name of the beast or the number of the beast, 666, on your forehead or your right hand. That's true. Okay. The second beast, and I'm going to read this through because it's just, I need my glasses. Okay, so then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. So this is after the first beast. It had 2 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded for the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. Also it causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be marked on the right hand, there you go, Carl, or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark. That is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for its number is 666. So, the second beast, he exercises the authority of the first beast, and we saw the first beast is already making war on the saints and making life hard. He makes the earth and its inhabitants worship this beast. He performs great signs, even making fire come from the sky. He deceives he deceives those who dwell on the earth, and that's the whole earth. The image of the beast is made, which speaks, and those that don't worship the beast are slain. And the beast is given, or the mark of the beast is given on your right hand, your forehead. No one can buy or sell without the mark. We're going to talk a little bit more about the mark in just a minute, so I'm not going to, yes.
You know, it says it spoke like a dragon.
Yeah.
Okay, and dragon is synonymous with Satan.
Satan.
So this is probably Satan, then, right?
This is at least Satan speaking through this image. So yeah, we see Satan, but Satan is being thrown down. So to say which one of these is actually Satan and which one is, but it's all happening together. So doing one is like worshiping the first beast, we saw it last week, is worshiping Satan. Following this guy is worshiping the first beast, is worshiping Satan.
It says that he was thrown down to earth, so Satan is on earth at this time.
I think so.
So he's doing his dastardly deeds at this time.
Yes.
So it's possible what it is.
So the image of the beast, it says that the image, get my glasses on again. It deceives all those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so the image of the beast might even speak and cause those who would not worship the image to be slain. Okay. So the second beast, working with the first beast, deceives all who dwell on the earth, tells them to make the image, them would be the people of the earth. The image is given breath and speaks, and causes all who don't worship the beast to be slain. By the way, I'm going to say this again in a minute, but worshiping the beast is synonymous for Satan. Taking the mark is synonymous with like us showing our allegiance to Christ through baptism. You're showing your allegiance to Satan by taking this mark. The mark of the beast also causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead. We read this, and so they're going to be marked with 666, or the name of the beast, either on the right hand or the forehead. And if you don't take that, you can't buy or sell. You can't pay your cell phone fees. You can't pay your mortgage, your rent, your utilities. Can't buy food. Can't buy gas for your car. Basically, you can't do anything. It's making it really hard on God's people. I don't think you'll be able to. I think the mark of the beast is going to take the place of the credit card, actually. I think I just said everything that's on this slide. Taking the mark is the outward sign or act of worship towards the beast, much as baptism is an act of worship for Jesus. It's a hard issue. So if somebody's just going to pin you down and force you to take the mark, I think you have to give allegiance to Satan. That's the way it appears to me. We'll see when the time comes. Actually, I don't want to be here during that time. Yes, John.
Once you've taken the mark of the beast, there's no way of going to heaven or...
No, you can't just cut off your hand and okay, so, well, if we can eat and we can buy gas and we can buy and sell if we take the mark, then what happens to those who do take the mark? Well, Revelation 14 tells us, 14:9 says, another angel, a third, followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or his hand, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength in the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night, these worshippers of the beast in this image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. And it says here is a call for the endurance of the saints. You have to endure. You can't take that mark.
Again, this is before
This
God's wrath.
This is before God's wrath is poured on, and this is before the rapture. I don't like them.
Basically, anyone that doesn't take the mark is going to starve to death and die anyway.
Except that this time period is cut short for the sake of the elect.
I mean, the only, how do you describe it? The only faith I know that teaches their people to store food and everything else is Mormons.
Yeah.
You know, they're the only ones that are going to have food because none of us are even going to know how to make bread out of it.
Okay, but think about this, Doug. If you can't pay your taxes, you can't pay your mortgage or your rent, that food's going to be in your basement, but you're not. You're going to be out on the street, so you don't even have access to that food.
Unless you have to pay your house off.
Of course, how many of those people would probably be taking the mark? You got to ask that too. Just side thought. Okay, what will you do when faced with the choice? This is heavy application right here. In Daniel 3:18, we have a situation where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were told by King Nebuchadnezzar that if they don't bow down to this statue of Nebuchadnezzar, that they will be thrown into a fiery furnace. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king. Now this king is the most powerful person in the entire world. Okay, he says to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. What you're saying doesn't even matter, king. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. I mean, they're being sassy to this king. But if not, be it known to you that even if my God does not rescue us from this, we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image. My question to you, will you worship the image to save your life or that of others? Your grandkids, your kids, friends? The answer should be you will never worship this image. Will you take the mark? Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego chose to worship their God, even if it cost them their life. We should do the same.
Sounds easy.
It's not easy. We're all faced with the valley of decision. Joel says, multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near. In the valley of decision, all people on earth must make the decision. Do I follow Christ, even to the point of death? Or do I follow Satan and worship the beast and face the wrath of God for eternity? Revelation 12:11 says, and they conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. They would rather worship God than save their own lives. So, in summary for today, yes, I'm looking at the clock. The Great Tribulation, it starts with the abomination of the abomination of desolation, which is midway through the 7-year period. It's greater tribulation than it has been since the beginning of the world, but the days are cut short for the sakes of God's elect. There are going to be false Christs and prophets who show signs and wonders, leading many astray. They will even be calling fire down from the sky. And I don't think that this is localized to Jerusalem. I think this is around the world. And I'm seeing at least some agreement here on that. He will use wicked deception. Oh, the lawless one is revealed and exalts himself above God. And he uses wicked deception. God sends strong delusion so the world might believe what is false. And the one who restrains evil is removed. The second beast makes everyone worship the first beast. The image of the beast is set up, showing signs and wonders, calling fire down from heaven, and all who don't worship it are killed. Everyone must take the mark of the beast on the right hand or the forehead, or you can't buy or sell without the mark. Taking the mark, however, means enduring the wrath of God forever and ever. We must make up our mind now not to worship the mark. This thing on more of the elect, we've talked about this throughout. What it's really saying is I'm showing verses here that say the elect will be here during this time. The days are cut short for the sake of the elect. Why do that if the elects aren't here? God's elect might be deceived, but it says if possible. So that kind of says that it's not possible. But he's talking about the elect. Everyone who worships the beast except those written in the Lamb's Book of Life from before the world. So if everyone's worshiping the beast except for those in the Lamb's Book of Life, it says that the people in the Lamb's Book of Life are still here. So there's no mistake, God's elect are here. Next week, I'm going to touch on this in just a second. Next week, okay, come on. Oh, there it goes. We're going to talk about the day of the Lord next week in more detail. We're going to talk about the rapture next week. We're going to talk about God's wrath and the aftermath next week. But I want to stress something here. The day of the Lord is seen by Jesus. It says immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give off its light. And the stars will fall from heaven. The powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn. And they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of heaven to the other. What we see here is Jesus, I'm going to use the word that everybody uses, rapturing his church. In the end, Jesus raptures his church. In the end, all of his people are saved. So God, even though things are going to get really, really bad, I want to stress that for God's people, that he is still mindful of us, and he will come for us. Any questions? That's actually the first slide for next week, so we'll be talking a lot more about the day of the Lord next week. Yes, Dave?
Isn't it at this time when all the warring starts to happen with all China, Russia, and all, that's when this stuff happens, when Christ, he raptures us out of it, then the war between Christ and Satan and all these armies takes place. Isn't that the sequence?
You're talking about the Battle of Armageddon. The Battle of Armageddon comes actually at the end of the wrath of God, and we'll talk about that next week a little bit. So, if that's what you're talking about, but the lineup of the armies around Jerusalem appears to be taking place at the beginning of the Great Tribulation. So, it all happens, and putting exact time frames on everything is a little bit difficult to do, but it's all happening in this time frame. So they talk about times and a half a time, a lot during this thing. So, anyone else? Comments, questions? Are we going to be among the people that choose not to take the mark? I hope so. Yes, I can close this in prayer. Dave?
You said the Spirit will be taken out. When will the Holy Spirit be taken out? Is there a reference?
In 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, it says the one who restrains, and I believe that's the Holy Spirit, will be removed. And that means that Satan gets, he can exhibit all of his wrath against God's people without permission from God, because God's given him. That's in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Okay, Heavenly Father, I don't mean to scare people with your word, but it is your word. And next week we'll see that you do triumph over Satan in a big way, and that even if we die during this time, which many of God's followers will do, that still we will end up in your presence. And so loving you more than loving our own selves is necessary. Endurance is necessary. And really having a strong faith and love for you is the way to prepare for this. I can't stress that enough. I pray that you give all of us the strength to endure till the end, so that, well, for one, that we don't take the mark. And I just ask your blessing upon this, and let us understand your word. Amen.